It is currently September 28th when I'm filming this intro, and as of right now, I've read 12 books this month. A few classics, a couple dark academia, and a lot of woodsy fairy tale books. Forgive me if the audio is wonky in the first few books. It's a beautiful rainy autumn day outside, so let's get into it. So the first book I read in September was Ace of Spades. The reason I read this was I was doing a presentation on dark academia. It has the most important part of critique of academia, and in this book's case it is racism and homophobia. This book gets really dark. When I was first reading it perfectly reminded me of Pretty Little Liars. If you know that like teen show, there's this mysterious person in the school who seemingly knows everything about people's actions, but the difference is more in the themes and the main characters. And it's very ominous, and there are these two black students in this otherwise entirely white school, and they get text messages from this person who threatens them and knows all of their secrets, knows everything about them, seemingly. One of our main characters is like the queen bee at the school, and the other is kind of an underdog. And he's gay, and he's struggling with the fact that his mother might not accept him for who he is, and just the people in his life may not accept him for being gay. This is a good book. I would recommend this to people who watched Pretty Little Liars and wanted a more cohesive ending, a thematic ending. I would recommend this to people who, care about racism and homophobia. I'll just let it be known there is a lesbian relationship and there is a gay relationship. Although, it must be said, like Pretty Little Liars, this is really YA. So if you don't like that, maybe don't read it. But each character had a very distinct voice. So the next book I read was The Nutcracker and the Mouse King, which is a classic. I was missing winter. It was hot, and I wanted something a little snowy. And last year I had read Midnight in Everwood, which is a Nutcracker retelling, which is more a retelling of the ballet, not the original book. And even though I thought that book was just kind of okay, I was feeling really nostalgic for it. So I read the original, the classic, and it was quite different from the ballet, which maybe is to be expected. I would recommend to read this in winter, on a stormy winter's night, just like with a cup of hot cocoa. It kind of made me feel like that, even though it was really hot outside. Overall, it was it's kind of a beautiful story. Bro, a mosquito literally just flew up my nose. I need bug spray. I really enjoyed Frankenstein. It's one of my favorite classics that I've read, and I would 100% recommend that anyone read it. It wasn't a difficult classic to read. Usually I struggle to understand the language in classics. I often struggle to comprehend what's going on, and that was not an issue for me reading Frankenstein. And there are a lot of amazing themes to explore, which I'm sure have been butchered in many an English class. I would recommend you read Frankenstein if you really like atmospheric books, because there's a lot of descriptions of stormy nights and traveling over sea. It's really, the descriptions in Frankenstein are really beautiful. So I recommend just reading it on a rainy day. Also, I would recommend this book to you if you really like morally complex main characters. Next, I read The Penelopaid by Margret Attwood. Margret Attwood. I have so many books by Margret Attwood because my mother loves Margret Attwood, and she hasn't been reading much, so she just gave all of her books to me. I have a great love for mythology and women, so this is a great combination. I had a lot of thoughts on this book. The Penelopaid is a retelling of the Odyssey told by Penelope's perspective, who is the young wife, to Odysseus. And this book is interesting because there is more summary than scene. The book starts with Penelope in the underworld. That's the first chapter. She's reminiscing on life and death. She's talking about what it's like in the fields of Asphodel, which is the Greek underworld. And most of our narrative scene comes in when she's in the underworld. But most of the book is her actual life, which is mostly narrative summary. So you don't feel connected to her personally. All the emotional scenes were very distant. I felt like I wanted to care about what was happening to the characters. I wanted to root for them, but I didn't care because I didn't know them. I just knew what happened to them. But this book does explore some great themes. There's a lot of discussion as who tells Penelope's story. Who is she? Penelope hears a lot of rumors about herself, a lot of rumors about Odysseus, rumors about her son. She hears rumors about Helen of Troy. There is also much discussion of beauty. Penelope is constantly compared to another more beautiful. This book is also interesting because when she's in the underworld, she gets to talk about modern things. The underworld parts take place in modern times. I would recommend this to you if you care more for the plot rather than the characters. If you're interested in feminism and the themes and ideas that are explored in this book. I wouldn't recommend this to you if you're a character-driven reader, if you want to explore the character of Penelope, because you're really not going to get that much of the character in this book. The next book I read was An Enchantment of Ravens by Margret Rogerson. I honestly really loved this book. It's about this girl named Isabel, and she is a painter in this magical world where the Fae, or the Fair Folk as they're called, but they're basically Fae, in a world where they can't create. They can't make art, they can't cook, they can't put anything new, they can't change the world. They just simply exist in it. And our main character, Isabel, is a painter, and so she is highly valued by the Fae. This book was an excellent exploration of what humanity is. There's a lot of discussion, obviously, about how humanity is what changes the world. You really get the sense that the Fae or the Fair Folk, they're not human, both in the way that they're described. It's very horror-y, but this very much isn't a horror book, but it's very vividly described. Their appearance of beautiful humanity is thin veneer over the real creatures that they are. This is kind of an adventure novel. There's also a romance, which is a pretty hefty part of the plot. This book also has an excellent exploration of art and its value. As an artist myself, I loved reading about how she creates and how important her art is to her. A few downsides of this book, or mainly just one. The main character is a little bit of a blank slate. You don't really get a sense of who she is as a person. She's smarter than the love interest. You don't really get a sense of who she is. Whereas I feel like all the other characters are very, very distinct. But the vibes are great, and so is the plot. We're adventuring through a mushroom-eaten autumn woods, and we go to a fairy court, and it's really peak fairy tale. I would 100% recommend An Enchantment of Ravens. The next book I read was Botanical Folk Tales of Britain and Ireland. This book is kind of just what it sounds like. It's a collection of short stories, or not really short stories, it's a collection of folk tales that pertain to plants, which a lot of folk tales do. I quite enjoyed this. It's a quick read. I do enjoy just waking up each morning and reading a little folk tale to start the day. Each folk tale's not very long, so they're easy to get through. I would recommend this to you if you enjoy folktales. I love folktales, and I actually learned a lot from reading this book. Next book I read was The Cloisters by Caddy Hayes. Once again, I read this because, it came in on my holds at the library, and I'm trying to read a lot of dark academia books for a presentation I'm making. It's about a girl who is accepted into this exclusive group called the Cloisters. The magic system, if it is magic, is based around tarot cards, which is really interesting. Along those lines, this book explores the idea of fate, whether our decisions are made for us or we make our own way. In terms of my thoughts on this book, I I don't think this was the most unique book I've read, but I have read a lot of dark academia books, and it does follow that structure. And once you've read a lot of a genre, you tend to know what's coming more. My thing with this book is the plot twists I thought I was trying to figure out, like the mysteries I thought I was trying to figure out, I figured out really easily. But then there were plot twists about things that I didn't think were mysteries, and oh my god, those were shocking to me. In terms of the romance, I was not super attached to it. And I felt like that about like a lot of the characters too. Like there was not a character that I loved that I felt very attached to that I could follow and care about. But that might just be me because I feel like the characters were very well defined. They were very different. They were unique from each other. But I didn't personally care about any of them, and in turn I didn't really care about the romance. This is also an interesting dark academia book because dark academia inherently critiques academia, and this book was critiquing academia. I wasn't entirely sure what part. It wasn't super focused. There were a lot of little things that it critiqued about academia. Perhaps the main thing it was critiquing in academia was how cutthroat it could be, how exclusive it can be, and like what you have to do to succeed in it. Although it does touch on, sexism. Overall, for me personally, this book was fine. It sucked me in. It was fast paced. I got through it very quickly, but I can't say that I was super moved by it. When I was reading, I just felt like I wanted more. Like I wanted more of the tarot cards. I wanted more of the characters and more of the plot. But I would recommend this to you if you like familiar plots, if you like to be able to predict what's happening. I mean, this book was shocking in some regards, and I think it was maybe so shocking because I thought I knew exactly what was going on. It is surprising, but also very familiar. I feel like I've read about this a lot. But I'm well versed in dark academia, as I said, so maybe if you're new to dark academia, and you are interested in exploring things about tarot cards and fate, I would recommend this to you. The next books that I read are Sorcery of Thorns and the novella sequel, Mysteries of Thorn Manor. Sorcery of Thorns is about this girl who works in a library, but in this world, the books are alive, and if they're not treated right or if they get angry, they can turn into monsters. And one day, a monster book escapes, and she has to deal with that. There are also demons and sorcerers. The sorcerers become sorcerers by making a deal with a demon, which I think is a really cool magic system. As for my thoughts on this book, I loved it. The world was very immersive. I could really visualize all of the beautiful descriptions. I love the characters, particularly this one character. His name is Silas, and I'm not going to say anything else about him because I think it would be a spoiler, but I just need to be known. I love Silas with all of my heart. This book has very well-defined characters. I can really see their differing personalities, which again are especially emphasized in the novella. I do see people classifying this book as dark academia, and I don't think it is. It's more just academia, because there's no specific critique of it. It's just taking place in an academic setting, with books and libraries. Although this book does portray some mild themes of nepotism, it's more spoken about jokingly amongst the characters than it is explored as a real theme. I think a critique I might have of this book is that it's quite predictable, especially at the beginning. It becomes a lot more winding, but at the beginning when you're first reading it, it feels like it's going to be a simple story. But I also, like, the plot twists don't land, but I don't think that they're supposed to be plot twists. I think if you read expecting a lot of plot twists, then you're going to be disappointed because it's more just like, this is what is happening, and it's a plot twist for the character, but not for the reader, and it's not supposed to be. This book is YA, so I would not recommend this to people who don't like reading YA. This book also involves a magical house, which is sort of alive, although that's much more present in the novella than it was in the standalone, because the way the series works is the first book is a standalone, and then there is just a companion novella that you don't have to read. It's not, like, technically a part of the series, although I would really recommend reading the novella because, to me, it was just as good as the first book. Like, oftentimes when you read novellas, it feels like a cheapened part of the story, but for me, I think it really elevated the characters and the setting. I really got to know the house, whereas before, I don't think I really processed that the house was alive. I knew that it changed, but I didn't process that it sort of had a mind of its own. And especially in the novella, you get to know the characters a lot better. And the plot is very simplistic. There are stakes, but I never felt them. I was never really scared that they weren't gonna make it out. Actually, that's a lie. There are times where I'm scared a character isn't going to make it out, but I was never really scared about our main character and it being the genre. I know that she's going to succeed. I was never scared that she wasn't, but I would also compare this book to cozy fantasy books because while the plot isn't technically cozy, it felt like it to me. I will say that the way this author writes, the ending is very abrupt, and I think that, for me, makes me feel like there's going to be more to the story, especially the way the novella ends. You're like, okay, so, like, where's the rest of it? There has to be another one. And as far as I can tell, there isn't going to be another one, but I'm rooting. Earlier this month, I read An Enchantment of Ravens, which is by the same author, and I think that Margret Rogerson is going to be one of my new favorite authors. And as an added bonus, this book has representation of bisexuals and aromantic people. Although not a huge, like, part of the plot, it is there, and I appreciate that. Like, I love the way she writes. She involves fairy tales, it's very immersive, beautiful worlds. She also has the thing of the Enchantment of Ravens was about art, the magic system is about art, and in this world, the magic system is around books and demons. I would recommend you read this if you enjoy fairy tales, or dark academia, or demon summoning, because there is all of those things, along with a few nature spirits. It's an amalgamation of many different things. This book is on the heavier romance side, so if you prefer less romance in your fantasies, then I would not recommend. Overall, I loved this book. It was great. So the next book that I read is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I'm not going to bother recounting what this book is about. If you're interested in Harry Potter, you're going to know what happens in Harry Potter. I'm just going to go and say I do not support J.K. Rowling, and there are ways to read her books without supporting her. I have a huge history with Harry Potter, which I think I'm going to make another video about, but basically I haven't read it in years, but it was my hyperfixation all throughout middle school, and I was just feeling nostalgic, so I picked up Prisoner of Azkaban, though I do not recommend supporting J.K. Rowling, spending any money on her. This one isn't really a whole book, it's a short story, but it's the murders on Rouge Morgue, which I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's by Edgar Allan Poe. And this was my required reading, and okay, I just needed to take a quick second and say, I did not like how this ended. What were you doing, Mr. Poe? This came out of left field, okay? I actually don't know what that saying means, but I think it means that it came out of nowhere, because it really did. It's about the narrator and his friend. They're solving a murder. This is kind of the origin of the murder mystery. That's how it was presented to me. I mean, it's really short. I loved the vibes. Until the ending. I just finished reading Ariadne by Jannifer Saint. And I've read a lot of these, like, Greek mythology book retellings, and this one was actually like quite unique as any of them can be. In case you don't know, this is the story of Ariadne from Greek mythology, who helps Theseus slay the Minotaur, and that's actually like a surprisingly little amount of this book. Like it's only like 30% of this book. This book explores a lot of themes of like women. These Greek mythology retellings often follow women. Like I read the Penelopaid earlier this month. It's kind of, these books are reclaiming the untold stories of the women in Greek mythology, because when you tell the stories about Greek mythology, it's all the people that Zeus is fucking, and all of the monsters that the male heroes slay. I can't say like this book does it pretty much in the same way that the other ones do, so once you've read one, you kind of just you know the gist of the rest of the books. But this book was unique because it was told from two POVs, Ariadne and her sister. It also talks about the gods and their immortality in a unique way, which made me view them differently. So I really appreciated that in this book. This story is kind of a tragedy. It's very sad, like all Greek mythology books are. So just, let that be known. I think this book takes a lot of creative liberties. Like, I don't think a lot of the stuff that's in here is in the original myth, but it's fine. Just I just finished it like a good 5 minutes ago, and I'm feeling a little bit unwell. Like this book is a tragedy, and it kept fooling me, because I actually didn't know how Ariadne's story ended. I usually know how all of these stories end, but in my brain, Ariadne's story ended with the Minotaur, and that was not most of this book. So it just, I didn't know where it was going. And that really, I'm feeling like super upset. Feeling just, I'm feeling things. And I feel kind of aimless because I just read this book all in one. And now I don't know what to do with myself, and I'm feeling very sad. This video may not have been the best quality. This is the first YouTube video I've ever made, but I really wanted to like upload videos talking about books because I read so much. I read over 100 books every year. I mean, like, just at max I read 110 books, but you get my point. I feel I need to talk about it with someone. I don't have a lot of friends who read, let alone like me. And as I keep making videos, as I keep reading, it'll get better. The audio is really weird. This is trial and error. I'm making this video on my phone. I don't have a camera. I don't have a microphone. I also just have a tendency to ramble on. Like my recording about Frankenstein was actually 20 minutes of me just straight talking. There was more of it, but that part wasn't about Frankenstein. I got distracted. I might do a separate video about Frankenstein because, oh my god, it's a beautiful classic. I'm about to go on a rant about classics, so I'm gonna stop myself. So if you watched to the end of this half an hour video of me rambling, I really appreciate it. I don't know if anyone will actually make it this far. I think in terms of what I want to do with my channel, I don't know if I'm gonna make more art content because I have uploaded some shorts of me drawing. But in terms of book content, I think I'm gonna talk about, the books that I read. I think I'm gonna talk about my favorite books. I think I'm gonna do videos like where I read every book by an author and explore their writing style, and also explore different tropes and different genres and how each book does it differently. And I also really love fairy tales, so I might do videos talking about like reading every single version of Rapunzel and how it differs. Or it might be like tier ranking very specific fairy tale tropes, like the maiden who seeks her brothers. I am bursting full with ideas, so we'll see where it goes, and I appreciate you. That's the end of the video.